Hello and welcome to the It's All Her podcast. Up till now, you've known us as She Does This, but this is our very first episode with our new name. It's all very exciting. I'm your host, Geordie Lucas. I was an actress in a former life. I was on Neighbours a long time ago, longer than I care to admit, and I'm the founder and editor of It's All Her. So yes, this week has been exciting. We launched the rebrand and relaunch yesterday. Today is Tuesday, so Tuesdays will be the new podcast day going forward. So subscribe wherever you're listening. A new episode will drop each Tuesday for you to get around. And I guess I just wanted to share quickly a little bit of what inspired this little relaunch and rebrand from She Does This. I have spoken to hundreds of women over the past few years about how they do what they do, and it became really clear to me that modern women of today are trying to do way too much, where mums, daughters, friends, partners, some of us are CEOs, business women, carers, we're the cleaners, where we carry most of the domestic load. We try and do it all, and we try to do it to the best of our abilities. And that is something that's really resonated with me. If you follow my personal page, you'll know that I'm a mum to an almost 2-year-old little girl. And of course, I run this business. So for me, the juggle and the struggle of trying to do everything to the best of my ability has caused a lot of mental angst. And I made it a little personal mission of mine to try and find ways to make my life easier, life hacks, products that make my life easier, whether it be in the kitchen or around the home. And I realized that we need to create more of this for women. We need to create more content that genuinely supports women in our quest to do it all. I read a quote recently that really stuck with me, and it was basically that as mothers, we're expected to raise our children as if we don't work, and when we're at work, we're expected to work as if we don't have children. And anybody who has had a child will know that that is completely unattainable and impossible to do. But we can make it easier for ourselves, and that was kind of where this idea for It's All Her was birthed. So going forward, you'll still hear from all the inspiring women that you love on how they do what they do, but there'll be a real focus on how they make their life easier and simpler. So you'll be able to subscribe to our weekly newsletter if that's your thing, which will have weekly rundowns of what's on the site, as well as hacks and tips that you can implement in your own life. And we also have a new Facebook group where women can share how they make their lives better and simpler. So yeah, I'm really excited, and I hope that this new chapter genuinely helps women. I will put all of the links that you need in the show notes. This week on the site, LGBT plus advocates Jessie and Millie, who are also mums-to-be, share 5 things no one tells you about IVF. And Australia's self-proclaimed pad lady and founder of Share the Dignity, Rochelle Courtney, talks about the medical condition that is currently affecting 1 in 3 women. At the age of 20, this week's guest, Rhiannon Tracey, had a promising career in veterinary nursing ahead of her. She was living a relatively normal, carefree life. She had a boyfriend, had just purchased her dream car, and was on holiday in Bali with her mum and best friend when she suffered a spinal cord injury and was told she would never walk again. In this episode, Rhiannon shares how she almost lost her life in a series of medical blunders and unfortunate events after her accident, and how she went on to defy medical odds and walk again. Now, you may have seen Rhiannon in the news recently fighting an unfair parking fine, so we talk all about the changes that she's fighting for there, and she also weighs in on the Fashion Week show that really missed the mark when it comes to being truly inclusive. Here's my chat with Rhiannon Tracey. Rhiannon, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast this week. I'm very excited to hear your story. We were just talking about COVID before. How did it affect your business?
Look, we went through the same roller coaster that so many businesses went through and so many people. Being an allied health service provider, we were closed, we were open, we were closed, we were open. when we were closed, we were able to move into telehealth, but the services that we offer are just so physical that the telehealth turned into more of a, I guess, mental check-in.
Yeah.
Which was still great, but, being the recovery centre that we are for people with, physical disabilities and injuries, we did see a lot of our clients deteriorate over the lockdown. So, really, really fingers, toes, everything crossed that we don't have to go through that again.
I know. It's horrendous, isn't it? So can you tell us a bit? I want to hear all about sort of your life after you had this sort of life-changing accident. But what was life like for you prior to that? Growing up, your hopes, dreams. Can you give us a bit of a picture of what your life looked like?
Sure. So growing up, I'm an only child.
Me too.
I was always a very social person. I loved just being around people in general, pretty strong imagination as well. Being an only child, you can probably relate.
Yes.
So, always loved to make people laugh. Always had quite a nurturing soul. So always liked to make sure that people were taken care of. And I guess for me, that segued into my career as a veterinary nurse. So I left school at the end of year 10. I had a pact with my mum and my stepdad that, if I had a job at the end of year 10, I could leave school, because I just had no idea when I was in school. Like, I had things that I loved, and music has always been a huge passion of mine. So, I wanted to leave school and become a singer, and, I was always into dramatic arts and things like that. But, I also had the reality of that's a very, cutthroat, career to try and take on. So, the deal was have a job, leave school at the end of year 10. So I did what most of my girlfriends were doing at the time, and I started hairdressing apprenticeship.
Oh, yeah.
Which, probably about 12 months into, I didn't enjoy. And I guess I felt that it was just not something that my heart was absolutely committed to. And I kind of always had this background noise that used to say to me, animals, 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 because, being that only child, I grew up around, dogs, cats, always loved being around pretty much any animals. So I started applying for jobs at local vet clinics just as a kennel hand.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to get a job as a kennel hand at a 24-hour animal emergency centre in Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
And then that turned into becoming a veterinary nurse. So I took on my studies, and I worked full time and studied via correspondence, and I absolutely loved it. It was so emotionally taxing. I remember I would do the 7 a.m. till 3 o'clock shift, and I'd be driving home from work on the phone to mum, bawling my eyes out every day, saying, "Oh my God, we had to do this, and I had to put this animal to sleep." And and mum just used to say, "You've got to stick it out. You've got to stick it out. You wanted this." And I think once I got past that 12 months, I guess you build up a bit of an emotional immunity to it. Yeah, I absolutely loved it. And for me, I started, I guess, within that kind of veterinary nursing career, I started thinking further into, animal studies, moving into, zoology and things like that. So just before I had my accident, I was given the opportunity to work with the giraffes at Melbourne Zoo, which I absolutely loved. There was a competition within a few vet clinics in Victoria, and they picked certain nurses to go and basically be caretakers for the giraffes, and I was lucky enough to do that. So, my goal was to move into zoology and things like that, because I just have always loved the connection that human and animal have with one another.
Yeah.
And I guess after I had my injury, that it kind of span around in a sense where I was no longer physically able to care for animals, and animals, I guess, started caring for me and my, mindset and things like that. So, yeah, as far as goals were concerned, March of 2009, when I had my accident, I just bought my dream car. So I bought my black Toyota RAV4 with a sunroof, and I couldn't wait for that summer to go down to the beach with my girlfriends. I had a boyfriend at the time that I had my accident as well. So, I guess what can you say as a 20-year-old? For me, there was definitely goals and aspirations, but I didn't really know the logistics of how it was all going to pan out because I guess I didn't really think about it too much.
Yeah. And I guess, that is the thing, isn't it? When we're young, we just coast along and you kind of never think things are gonna happen to you. But unfortunately, you did have this accident in Bali. So can you tell us about the trip that you were on and what happened?
So Bali for me was like a home away from home. So Mum and I would get our tax checks the end of every financial year and we'd be on the phone to each other and book our girls' trip to Bali. So we built like this extended family of friends over there that we would always go and see and stay with. This particular trip in 2009, I was taking my best friend and we were celebrating her birthday. Her and I had been best friends since about 7 years old, 7 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I just couldn't wait to, show her why I fell in love with Bali, like from the music, again, to the animals, to all the shopping for all the genuine fake, like Louis Vuitton Gucci bags, sunglasses. It was always like, take one empty suitcase so you can bring everything back. So this particular trip I was super excited about, and we just had the best. We were having the best time, and my accident actually happened, I think it was maybe 3 days before we were due to come home. So it was towards like right at the end of our trip. So we still managed to have, 10 days or something in Bali, and, we did all the things, and it was definitely a trip to remember and definitely a life changer in not the way that I expected it to be, that's for sure.
So you dove into a pool that wasn't well lit.
Yeah, so what I actually did was I did dive into the deep swimming pool. So where this particular resort was, there was 2 swimming pools. Well, it's one big pool, but it kind of has like a bridge that goes across it to divide the shallow from the deep end. And the deep, even though it's deep, the sides are actually still quite shallow-ish, and it's just the center of the pool that's deep. So it kind of literally would drop down. So I had literally dove into that swimming pool so many times before, like years before. And when I dove in, I guess I just misjudged where that drop was. And I actually hit like the bottom of the swimming pool where it went from shallow and dropped down deep. So I do remember it as if it were yesterday. I remained completely conscious, and given that I was 20 and I was in Bali, I get asked all the time, were you drunk, were you this? And I'm like, well, no, I actually wasn't. So much so that I was completely conscious throughout everything that happened. Had I drank earlier that day? Absolutely. Like, I was celebrating my best friend's birthday, but by the time we'd been home, it was 32 degrees or something like that. It was late at night. And if you've been to Bali, it doesn't matter what time it is, you're gonna rip your clothes off and get in your togs and just jump in the water. And that's exactly what I did. So, it could have happened in Bali, it could have happened here. It was just one of those things. And I'm here and I can still tell the story, and even talking about it, I don't get emotional or anything like that. It was 12 years ago. But I guess for me, it was the surviving the hospital and the medical care in Bali, and as well, of course, as while I was waiting for my surgery, Bali was hit with a massive earthquake. So I guess it was one of those situations where I honestly didn't think that I was going to survive, not so much the injury itself, but the whole ordeal of that night, being that the earthquake hit us pretty much straight after. I guess because of so many things panning out the way they did, I can honestly say that it happened for a reason. Like, I was clearly not meant to go. And now 12 years on and being able to do the things that I do and the things that I've done, like, there was a purpose behind everything.
Taking it back to that moment, did you know as soon as you hit the bottom of that pool that something serious had happened? Like, did you know in that moment that I've really, really injured myself?
I felt my whole body kind of like seize up. I instantly couldn't move and I was face down in the water. So I did panic, but I never, ever expected that I'd broken my neck or my back. I honestly just in my head had thought I had hit my head so hard that my body had gone into shock. You know, I've heard people talk about their injuries before and they say, you know, we felt like, I know that this sounds like a bit of a trigger warning, but, you know, people have said, you know, they actually literally felt their neck snap or their back snap or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe I did, but my body just went into, like, I know my body went into shock because it wasn't until, you know, hours later that I felt the pain. Like, I remember, you know, once I finally made it to the trauma center, I just remember being in excruciating pain. But, you know, my best friend and our friends who were with us, they pulled me out of the swimming pool as best that they could. And I could still feel touch. So everyone was touching my body. And I guess that's why I didn't think that it, you know, like it was that bad, because everyone's touching my body saying, can you feel this? Can you feel this? And I'd say yes. And then they'd reassure me that because I could feel everything, you know,
that you were okay,
that I was okay. So it wasn't actually until I was taken to the Bali International Medical Center, had a CT scan. I actually heard my mum scream when the doctors obviously had told her that my neck and my back were broken and the fragments of my broken vertebrae were pretty much piercing into both sides of my spinal cord, that I needed emergency surgery because I couldn't be moved, because if I was moved too much, they were scared that the vertebrae would be completely like slicing my spinal cord in half. So, you know, I guess I realized it was bad when I heard my mum scream, like, and that for me was probably more traumatizing than the accident happening.
Very haunting.
Yeah.
So what were those moments for you like when the doctors told you the severity of your injuries?
I guess I didn't really understand the severity of my injuries until I was back in Australia. So it was 2.5 weeks from the time of the injury to being back in Australia, because the earthquake had happened. The surgery was, you know, put on hold until all the earthquake stuff was over. And, you know, given, I guess, the lack of, for a better word, I don't know whether it's education or resources, but I was never given like a clear cutthroat answer as to what my injuries were and what the outcome was in Bali. Like in Bali, I was getting, you know, if you just close your eyes and smile through your heart, like literally this is what they were saying to me.
Not helpful.
Not helpful. You know, and just for me, like it was just, I was so off my head on all the medications that they were giving me. Like I remember the tricks. I'm not a big drinker. I've never been a drug user, but I remember the tricks like that I was on when I was in Bali because of the medication and just all the different things. So, you know, for me, it was like that 2.5 weeks that I was in that hospital, how I even survived. Like I ended up with blood clots. I ended up with my lungs collapsing. When we came back to Australia, we realized like the surgery that they'd done in Bali had completely failed. So I needed like 3 more surgeries back in Australia. So for me, like, I guess I didn't even really think too much about what was happening moving forward. It was more of I need to survive this day to get to the next day, to get back home, because in my mind, everything was going to be okay when I got back to Australia.
Yeah.
Like that was my mentality. And unfortunately that wasn't the case.
Yeah. I read as well that your health insurance covered for nurses to be flown over to Bali to actually care for you.
Yeah. So what happened was a nurse and a doctor flew over to Bali, and they honestly just expected to get to Bali and pretty much like put me on a gurney, put me on a plane and bring me home. So when the doctor and the nurse got to Bali and I was literally like not even breathing, they went into panic mode. They were all, just to kind of paint the picture of what it's like in Bali. So the doctor and the nurse from Australia ordered radiographs to happen of my chest.
Yeah.
And because they could see that, they were like, why can't she breathe? You know, what's going on? The report came back that my lungs were completely fine. However, I still remember the male nurse holding up the radiograph, taking a photo of it on his iPhone and sending it back to Australia, and both of my lungs were completely collapsed, but the report said that they were fine.
Oh my God.
It was like, they just went into panic mode. Like when Australia received that, they were like, okay, we need to get her home. I'd caught so many infections and stuff in the hospital in Bali that they were just like too scared to do anything else. I hadn't been to the bathroom in 2.5 weeks either. So like I was that compacted and that blown up. So what they decided was that they needed to move me back to the Bali International Medical Centre, as that was run by Westerners.
Yeah.
Because obviously there was a huge language breakdown as well.
Mm.
So I was taken back to the BIMC, pumped full of enemas and antibiotics and anything that they possibly could to just try and get me stable enough to bring me home.
Yeah.
And then we had to work out because of the plane and everything like that. At that point, my best friend had gone home, like when when we were all meant to go home, she'd gone home. And then the travel insurance company flew my stepdad over to be with my mum, because my mum was obviously on her own when all this was happening.
And how traumatizing for her to see her child in this state. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had to make the decision. Like I remember it while I was in the BIMC, they said, you know, you have to work out, obviously you need somebody here up until you get on that plane and go, but you also need to work out what parent you want to send home so that they're there at the hospital. So
yeah,
I sent mum home so that she was there on the other side, and then stepdad stayed with me. And then when I was put onto the air ambulance, one of the doctors injected me with an antibiotic. Turned out I was allergic to the antibiotic, so I went into anaphylaxis.
Oh, you are joking.
So, you know, my mum's like hours are passing, and my mum was like contacting my stepdad being like, okay, like what's happening? What's the update? And he was like, they haven't taken off, like she's gone into anaphylaxis, like, oh, so traumatizing for my family. And like, these are the little things that I remember. But, you know, I got back to Australia, and I was taken straight to the Austin hospital, put into isolation, and also then put into ICU, put into an induced coma. They basically just needed to start from scratch, had no idea, but the doctors really had no idea what they'd done. So this doctor and the nurse were trying to, you know, explain everything to them. So they just went, no, we'll just do this. And turned out that what actually Bali had attempted to wire all my broken vertebrae out with stainless steel, whereas in Australia we take everything out, replace it with titanium. So that's what they needed to do. However, because of my lungs, they needed to have me in the induced coma so that the physios could actually come in and work my lungs to get them to a point where they could safely operate without, you know, anything else bad happening.
So how long were you in the coma for?
Honestly, I couldn't tell you. I think it was just a few days.
Yeah.
But I was in the coma in between surgeries. So I had 2 surgeries, and then after all of that, I had another surgery where they had to put cages in my groins to catch blood clots, because I had blood clots as well. So yeah, it was definitely a time.
So after all of these surgeries, you're then told that you wouldn't walk again, but you defied the doctors because you have actually gone on to take steps and you can stand. How? How?
I wish I had a simple answer to that, but I really don't. Look, for me, and I think everybody that I've met with this injury, you know, the primary goal is to be able to walk again. I guess I had age on my side. Being 20, you know, if we're speaking on neurological terms, you know, there's still muscle memory. I had an incomplete injury, which means thankfully my spinal cord wasn't severed.
Yes.
So, you know, there has been some, I guess, natural recovery. Not, you know, in saying that, I have absolutely worked my ass off to get where I am. But if everybody did what I did, would they have the same recovery? Probably not, because this injury is so complicated and it's like snowflakes. No two are ever the same. So, you know, for me, it was definitely all about walking for probably the first 3 years, I'm going to say. Literally every time somebody told me I couldn't do something, like mum and I were like, okay, well, let's go and find a way to do that. I remember being in hospital and, you know, because I had my injury in Bali, my injury was completely uncompensated, which meant that my family had to fundraise and sell everything down to, you know, cars, hobbies. Like my stepdad, you know, had go-karts, like they were selling everything. And so, you know, mum was driving my car because we'd sold one of the cars. And, you know, because I'd only driven my car for such a short time from buying it, she was like, you know, we need to get you in this car. We need to, you know, I'd gone from being in an electric wheelchair to in a manual chair that I couldn't even push. But mum was like, all right, in this physio session, we're going to ask your physio how we're going to do this. And I remember we went into physio. Mum's pushed me into the physio gym. She's asked the physio and he's like, nah, like, it's just not a possibility. It's a RAV4. It's really high and yada, yada, yada. And mum literally turned the chair around and took me out to the car park, wheeled me up next to the car. And she was like, all right, I have no idea how we're going to do this, but we're going to do it. And like, I just remember limbs flying around everywhere. But it was like, it was a matter of, if I could get into that car, it meant that I could go home for the weekends, like from being in hospital or being in rehab. And it just opened up so many other possibilities. You know, I think when you're born with an injury or a disability, it's all you know. But when something happens to you, that readjustment period, like it is just, it's horrible. It's not a nice time. And for me, I was consistently trying to find somebody that I could talk to that could relate. And it didn't matter who was coming into the hospital room, you know, friends, family. It was just like, I just was looking for hope. You know, I just wanted somebody to be like, you know what, Rhiannon, this is the A's and the B's of spinal cord injury, and this is what you need to prepare for, and this is what you need to accept, because when you're in hospital and when you're newly injured, it's all about, you have to accept that this is your fate. Like, you just have to accept it. And I'm like, how the hell is somebody meant to accept this? Like, and this is coming from an able-bodied person. You know what I mean? So for me, it was really like, I was like the mischievous schoolgirl all over again, because I was wagging wheelchair skills. Like, there was a course called wheelchair skills, and I was like, I refuse to go to that because I'm not going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. And it's funny because I went on a date the other day, and he had to actually help me get up a curb, and he knows my story, and he was like, why did you bloody wag wheelchair skills, Rhiannon? It's like, this is 12 years later. And I just laughed. Like, the people who know me, they're like, of course you did. You know what I mean? But like, you know, for me, my mindset, even to this day, is I'm not in a wheelchair. You know what I mean? I'm not in a wheelchair. And I think the people that, you know, spend more than 5 minutes having a conversation with me, they also forget that I'm in a wheelchair. But, you know, going through the process, the more things I was able to achieve made me realize all the things that we take for granted when we are able-bodied. And, you know, being able to drive my car, being able to do my own personal care, you know, just all those little things became so much more important and meaningful to me than being able to walk. And, you know, I guess I got to a point where I was like, okay, well, I've got a life, but all I'm doing with it is working on walking, but I'm not enjoying it. So I need to learn, I need to understand that this life that I've been given, I need to live. And that's what I do, you know. And now, even though I was never into fitness or anything like that prior to my injury, obviously it's my life now, but it's not, you know, because I want to have a, you know, a Victoria's Secret body or anything like that. It's that these are the things I've actually had to do to be able to have that quality of life.
Yeah. And do you think that the experience has made you value your body more because you almost lost your life?
Absolutely, 100%. It's so funny. My mum laughs at me all the time because she's like, I've never known somebody who's so in tune with their body. Like, I don't eat chocolate. I don't eat chocolate by any means. And it's not because, you know, I'm trying to be healthy. I'm just not, I don't have a big sweet tooth. And my mum was here the other week, and I was like, oh my God, I need chocolate. I'm going to have my period tomorrow. And I literally woke up the next day and I had my period. She was like, you are insanely in tune with your body. And I was like, I just know these things, you know, and I am like, I know I've had to learn to listen to the signs that are my body, because, you know, my autonomic nervous system is completely different, which basically means that the messages, you know, like if you're feeling unwell or if something in your body's hurting, you know, you'll feel it by way of pain or pressure, whereas my body feels it by, you know, getting really sick or, you know, not being able to go to the bathroom or just physically not being able to get out of bed. And I never want to get to that point because I have far too many responsibilities for a start. And also because, you know, I want to be out and about being a 32-year-old, having fun with my friends and living my life. So, you know, it's a big thing. It's a big thing, you know, having to learn how to listen and understand your body. And that's what I teach people now, because I don't want people to have to go through some huge physical or emotional trauma to know when their body is yelling and screaming at them.
Yeah. I follow quite a few disability advocates, and it's really interesting because a lot of them have quite different relationships with the word disabled and how they would like to be seen. Some wish to be sort of labelled disabled, whereas others resist that title. What's your relationship with the word disabled or disability, and how has that evolved over time?
So in the early days, I could not stand the word. I absolutely could not stand being called disabled or saying I have a disability. In fact, I did the majority of my own rehabilitation over in America at a facility over there. And instead of using the word disabled, they were referring to me as injured. And for me, the mindset around that was completely different. Like, it normalized me in that time. Whereas I guess 12 years on, the reality is it is a label that we've been given to, I guess, differentiate us between able-bodied people. And it's something that I guess I have just learnt. I've just learnt to embrace. You know, people always say to me, when I meet new people, they're like, oh, you know, do you play wheelchair sport? Do you do this? Like all these things that are part of, I guess, the stigma around if you're disabled, you're either a Paralympian or you play wheelchair basketball. And I was like, you know what? I was never into sport, into sport. But now, you know, because of this label, I'm actually given the opportunity to fight for the things that we're entitled to that make us just as able as everybody else. You know, I've been really grateful and lucky in the sense that in the last 12 years, I've just been thrown into this whole new world that I didn't even know existed. And I hate using the word inspiring, but, you know, it's because of the people that I've met and the things that I do now that I get out of bed each day because I want to, not because I have to.
I was just thinking inspiration porn comes to mind. Because a lot of the advocates that I follow and I interact with, they say I don't exist to inspire other people to, you know, seize their life or take an opportunity. I'm existing because I have the right to exist as I am.
And I can relate to that because, you know, even when people say, oh, you know, you're inspiring and things like that, and trust me, like, it's a weekly occurrence. You know, and it can be, you know, because I've gone and I've done a talk, or because I've met someone when I've been out with friends, and somebody's like, oh my God, I'm so proud of you. And I'm like, why are you proud of me? Because I'm out having a good time. For me, that's a projection of, okay, perhaps if this hadn't happened to you, you'd be sitting in a sad, dark corner. Whereas like, this is my life. And honestly, I'm just playing the cards that I've been dealt with. It's my job to tell my story now. You know, it really is my job. And it's not something that I'm like, you know, oh my God, you know, I really hope that because this happened to me, like, you're super inspired. Like, no, I'm cutthroat. I'm unfiltered. I'm like, this is what happened. But you know what? Like, I'm also 32 years old. So yes, I've had a spinal cord injury, but I've gone through a divorce as well. And that was probably more emotionally taxing and built more resilience in me than my spinal cord injury. So, you know, like, I'm just like, I'm just playing those cards.
So you made the news last week after you received a parking fine. Can you tell us a bit more about what happened and then maybe about the action that you're calling for?
Sure. I live literally probably 500 meters from Cardinia Park, so the Geelong Cat Stadium.
Yeah.
And my street is all on-street parking. That being said, I have a driveway at the back of my house, which has, a big old rusty gate. You can't even fit a car in the carport. But when I moved to Geelong from Melbourne last year, I actually had applied through the NDIS to have modifications done to the back entrance of my home so that my house would be accessible for me. Mm-hmm. Now, before I even applied for the house that I'm living in, a friend of mine who works in construction for disabilities and accessible housing actually got pre-approval from the NDIS to do all these modifications. So that's why I went, okay, cool, I can move. I can live in this house. Everything will be fine. The long and short of it was moved in, applied for my NDIS, got rejected based on the fact that it's a rental, even though the owners had given full approval for these mods to happen. Yeah. I contested that and I still got rejected the second time. So I was like, all right, well, I'll just do what I always do. And, I'll just work out a way to make this work. So my way to make it work was I'm just going to have to park on the street like everybody else, which is all good and fine unless there's a football game on. So we have, there's parking, but there's no standing spots in really random locations. So where my car spot, I think it's not technically mine, it's public parking. But there is a car spot right out the front of my house. And then in front of that is a no standing zone. So when the football was on or is on, all the parking on the street is taken and I'm left without any parking. There's been about 3 or 4 instances now where I got my initial parking ticket for parking in the no standing zone. I contested that based on the fact that my disabled permit was up. It's the only safe way for me to park and get into my house. The letter that I received back from the Geelong Council was, we need a report to prove that you're disabled and we want a copy of your NDIS rejection. And I was like, that's cool. I'll get all that and I'll actually go into Geelong Council and their proof can be seeing me physically because I was like, the fact that I'm being asked to prove my disability when I have a disabled permit is one thing. Yeah. Everything else is, also rubbish. So then, not Saturday, just gone, the Saturday before. Not the Saturday, Friday night, same thing happened. I'm driving home from Melbourne, coming to Geelong, see that the stadium lights are on. I'm on the phone to my friend. Like I've got Siri going, I've got Apple CarPlay. And I said, oh my God, there's a game on. And he goes, it's Geelong and Essendon. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to be packed. And it was raining. So I was like, I'm going to have no choice but to park like in the no standing zone. And I was also busting to go to the toilet too. So I have, I do intermittent catheters. And if my bladder actually gets full, I can have a stroke. So okay. I was like, all right, I'm just gonna have to pull up and park and like get in there. And if I get a ticket, well, I'll just have to contest that as well. Like, what choice do I have? So woke up on the Saturday morning, had a ticket. This time it was $180 something as opposed to the $165 the one was previously. So I found that on the Saturday morning as I was heading out to another event in Geelong. I just kind of ripped the ticket off the dashboard and threw it in my car. I was like, I'll deal with that later. Then when I got to the event space, which was a function centre, there was absolutely no disabled parking in the function space. And I was like, okay, this is obviously a big issue for Geelong. Yeah. So I was talking to a few of the people that were at the event and telling them about these tickets, and they were just like, no, you need to do something. So when I got home from the event, my best friend and my mum were both at my place waiting for me. And I said, come out and take this photo because something needs to happen here. This is ridiculous. And said photo just went absolutely insanely viral, which I'm glad it did. I didn't expect it to get the traction that it did, but I think in a matter of 2 weeks, disability access had been in the media the week before because somebody I actually know was refused entry to a restaurant based on the fact that they didn't have the space for him because he was in a chair.
I saw that. Yeah.
You know, so, and then this had happened, and I was like, this is such, there's so many issues here, from having to prove that I'm disabled to these consistent parking fines, to the fact that there's just a clear lack of disability parking and access within this community as a whole. So I was contacted by the council. Council came to my house. I had 3 councillors here. The long and short of it was, I still have to prove that me parking there was an emergency situation. So I had to go back to my doctor a second time, who my doctor at this point, she's fuming. Like, she's just like, this is absolutely ridiculous. Like, they've actually been to your house and seen. And the funny thing is when they came to my house, one rocked up on a scooter, the other one rocked up in an Uber, and the other one parked right down the end of the street. When they came up, I said, were you afraid you weren't going to get parking? Like, you know, that's the reality of this situation. So there was really no outcome from that meeting. They were all going to go back and talk amongst themselves. I made it very clear to them. I said, I'm here to help you guys bridge the gap within this community, because this is an absolute nightmare. You know, the fight that I was having with the counsellor was, he was saying, well, it's against the law. And I'm like, okay, so we need to change the law. You know? I said, we need to change the law, because that law is obviously been made by an able-bodied person. Simple. Like, you know, so it's not done. And I'm definitely not just sitting on my hands, because I think, you know, I've given them an opportunity to be educated and to learn etiquette as well. Yeah. And to make a change.
The other recent time that disability awareness and inclusion has been in the media is the recent Fashion Week event. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, look, do you know what? It really pains me to say that I was not surprised in that at all. And I say that because I speak from personal experience. So I did Melbourne Fashion Week not last year, the year before, so 2019. And the show that I was in was on an abandoned level of Eureka Tower here in Melbourne, with absolutely no toilets anywhere. So the toilet for able-bodied people was like in that you had to go down. It was so I think the floor was like the 81st floor that we were on. And so the able-bodied models had to go to the basement, down a flight of stairs, and that's where the toilets were. And they did not even consider the fact that they had a model in a wheelchair.
And I think that's probably where it feels performative as well, is when they include, but only to a certain extent, like with you being included in the fashion show, but then they didn't make inclusions for you behind the scenes.
That's exactly right. And around the time I did my fashion show for Melbourne Fashion Week, that same year, I was discarded from a fashion show because instead of asking me, so this particular show that I was meant to be in meant walking around, or like the runway was around the Melbourne CBD. So instead of coming to me and asking me what parts of the CBD I could do, they actually discarded me from the show altogether. The amount of times I've yelled and screamed and just, you know, it's been thrown in the too hard basket. We don't book the jobs because people aren't prepared to do the work or undertake the learning. And that's just, excuse my French, but it's absolute bullshit.
So going forward, and just to finish off on this, how can we as a society be more inclusive and better allies to the community?
Have the conversations. You know, I saw comments that were on, you know, the news clippings and things the other day where people were saying, how can she be a quadriplegic if she's moving her arms? And like my people, so like the disability community, were jumping in there and saying, and just simply writing, Google it. Yeah. You know what I mean? Google it. Be open to the learning, because, you know, at some point in your life, you are going to age, you know, and there are going to be things that you can't do in the future that you can do now. So become aware of the potential for that, because, that's where we sit now. And in all those years to come, you're going to want to be able to do the things that you love, you know, perhaps in a more adaptable and inclusive way. You know, it's simply about understanding the fact that we are all the same. Like, we're all human beings, and we all deserve to be treated the same way. You know, you don't, you know, it's how the old saying goes, treat people how you'd like to be treated.
Yeah. Which is pretty simple, really, isn't it?
Yes.
Rhiannon, thank you so much for coming on the podcast this week, and I hope that you see some real action from the Geelong counsellors that you met with, and get some change in the future.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of It's All Her. If you have enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We will be back next week talking all things motherhood, co-parenting, and influencing with Abby Gilmore.